If you're watching this, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I read every single one. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 4 years, I have been paying for a life that was never truly mine to live. I want to tell you what happened on the morning of my wedding anniversary, the morning my mother-in-law sold my grandmother's pearl earrings to cover a credit card bill she'd been hiding from everyone, including her own son. I want to tell you what I said, what I did, and why 3 months later I have never slept better in my life. But first, let me back up, because nothing about that morning makes sense unless you understand how I ended up there. I grew up in a small town in central Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knows your name and your business and your mother's business and your grandmother's business going back 3 generations. My grandmother, my mom's mother, was the most quietly powerful woman I have ever known. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply did what needed to be done, and she expected the same from the people she loved. When I was 22, she sat across from me at her kitchen table, poured 2 cups of coffee even though I didn't really drink it yet, and slid a small velvet pouch across the table toward me. "These were your great-grandmother's," she said. "She wore them on her wedding day. Your grandfather gave them to me on ours. Now I'm giving them to you, and someday you'll know when it's right to pass them along." Inside the pouch were 2 pearl drop earrings set in white gold. Simple. Perfectly oval. The kind of thing that doesn't look like much until you hold them up to the light. I cried. She patted my hand once and told me not to be dramatic. I kept those earrings in a small wooden box on my dresser for 5 years. I wore them exactly 3 times, once to my grandmother's funeral when she passed the following winter, once to a job interview that got me my first real position as a hospital administrator, and once on my wedding day. I married my husband Derek 4 years ago. He is a good man, I want to be clear about that. He works hard, he is kind, he loves me. But he has one significant blind spot, and that blind spot has a name, and that name is his mother. Her name is Patricia. Everyone calls her Pat. I call her my mother-in-law to her face and other things in my head that I won't repeat here. From the moment Derek and I got serious, Pat made her position clear. Not through anything she said outright, she was too smart for that. It was the small things. The way she'd comment on my cooking at holiday dinners by suggesting her son's favorites were always welcome. The way she'd reference Derek's ex-girlfriend, a woman named Stacy, who apparently existed in some golden era before I arrived, just often enough to remind me she existed. The way she'd call Derek's phone at 9 on a Sunday morning and talk for 40 minutes while I sat next to him with a cup of coffee going cold. I told myself it was normal. Mothers and their sons. I told myself I just needed to give it time. What I did not fully grasp in those early years was that Pat did not just want to maintain closeness with her son. She wanted to maintain control. And control, I would learn, meant access to our home, our schedule, our finances, and eventually our future. Derek and I bought a house 2.5 years into our marriage. A modest 3-bedroom in a suburb outside of Columbus. We stretched to afford it. And I mean stretched. I was working full-time plus picking up occasional consulting hours, and Derek had just taken a new position that paid better but came with a longer commute. We were not flush. We were managing. 3 months after we moved in, Pat called to tell us she'd been let go from her job. Office restructuring, she said. Totally unexpected. She sounded genuinely shaken, and I felt for her, I truly did. I suggested Derek help her look into unemployment benefits, maybe connect with a career counselor. What happened instead was that Pat moved into our guest room. Just temporarily, Derek said. Just until she gets back on her feet. 13 months later, she was still there. I want to be fair. For the first few months, she contributed, she cooked dinners a few times a week. She kept the common areas clean. She watched our dog when we traveled for work. It wasn't without value. But somewhere around month 4, a shift happened that I couldn't quite name at the time. The cooking became less frequent. The cleaning became selective. And Pat began treating the house less like a place where she was a guest and more like a place where she had standing. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets without asking. She told Derek that the throw pillows in the living room were too busy and replaced them with ones she'd bought herself, without mentioning it to me. She began joining us for dinner every single night, including the nights I had cooked specifically for the 2 of us because we needed to talk through something private. I raised it with Derek, more than once. He would listen, he would nod, he would say he'd talk to her, and then nothing would change. Not because he was indifferent, I genuinely believe that, but because the conversation with his mother was one he did not know how to have without it becoming an event. And Pat, for her part, had a gift for making any boundary Derek tried to draw feel like an act of cruelty against her. So I adapted. I stored things in our bedroom. I scheduled calls with my friends for my lunch hour at work so I could speak freely. I kept my grandmother's jewelry box in the back of my closet, behind a stack of shoe boxes, because something in my gut told me to. That gut feeling turned out to be the most important thing I listened to in years. Our 4th anniversary was a Saturday in April. Derek had made a reservation at a restaurant we'd been wanting to try a nicer place downtown, the kind that requires planning ahead. He'd kept it a surprise, which was unusual for him, and I was genuinely touched. We had been so deep in the daily logistics of work and the house and navigating life with Pat underfoot that romance had become something we talked about wanting more of rather than something we actually made time for. I woke up that morning feeling light, hopeful in a way I hadn't in a while. Derek had left early for a Saturday morning workout class with a friend. I made coffee, took my time getting dressed, and decided I wanted to wear the pearl earrings that night. Not because it was a big occasion, exactly, but because my grandmother felt close to me on anniversaries. Because wearing them felt like bringing her along. I went to the closet. I moved the shoe boxes. I picked up the small wooden box. It was lighter than it should have been. I knew before I opened it. The box was empty. I stood in that closet for a long moment, just holding the open box. My brain kept cycling through explanations. Had I moved them? Had I put them somewhere else? Was I misremembering? But underneath all of that was a cold, settled certainty that I was not misremembering anything. I walked out of the bedroom. Pat was in the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of the coffee I had made, reading something on her tablet. "Good morning," she said, without looking up. "Where are my grandmother's pearl earrings?" She looked up then. And I want to tell you that there was a flicker, just a split second of something that was not quite guilt but was close enough to it. Then her expression settled into something more composed. "I borrowed them," she said. "You borrowed them. I needed something nice for Linda's retirement luncheon last weekend. I meant to put them back. Where are they now, Pat?" A pause. Shorter than it should have been. "I may have left them at the venue. I'm sure they're in Lost and Found." She said it the way someone says something when they already know it isn't true. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I went back to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and called the restaurant where Linda's retirement luncheon had apparently taken place. There were no pearl earrings in their Lost and Found. I sat with that information for a moment. Then I opened my laptop and did something I probably should have done months ago. I started looking at Pat's patterns. Not snooping through her things, but paying attention to what I already knew. The credit card offers that occasionally came to our address in her name. The way she had recently started asking Derek careful, indirect questions about whether our home equity had grown much. A comment she'd made 2 weeks ago about how certain vintage jewelry was surprisingly valuable these days. Then I called a pawn shop. Not because I was certain, but because I was not willing to be naive anymore. The third one I called, on the eastern side of Columbus, had a record of a recent transaction involving pearl drop earrings in a white gold setting. Sold 6 days ago. The amount was $180. My grandmother's earrings, the ones that had been in my family for 3 generations, the ones she placed in my hands at that kitchen table, had been sold for $180 to cover what I would later learn was an outstanding balance on a credit card Pat had not told anyone about. I hung up the phone. I did not cry. I was too clear-headed to cry just then. I called Derek. "Hey, I was just about to head home. I need you to come home now," I said. "Something has happened and I need you here before I say anything to your mother." He was home in 20 minutes. I told him everything, calmly, in our bedroom with the door closed. I showed him the name of the pawn shop. I showed him what I'd found. I watched his face go through several different emotions and settle on something that looked like stunned disbelief. "She wouldn't," he said. "She did." "Claire, are you sure?" "I called the shop, Derek. They have a record of the transaction. I can drive there right now and confirm it if that's what we need to do." He sat down on the bed. We were both quiet for a while. "I'll talk to her," he said finally. "I know you will," I said, "but I want to be there." We went downstairs together. Pat was still at the kitchen table, though the tablet was put away now. She had the particular stillness of someone who has been listening and knows a conversation is coming. Derek sat down across from her. I stood near the doorway. "Mom," he said. "Claire's grandmother's earrings are missing. She called a pawn shop on Bexley Road. They have a record of pearl earrings being sold there 6 days ago." He paused. "Did you take them?" Pat looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at me. "I was going to pay her back," she said. Derek closed his eyes briefly. "The credit card had been past due for 3 months," she continued, her voice shifting into something more defensive. "I didn't have options. I didn't want to ask you for more money after everything. I thought it was just jewelry." "Those were my grandmother's," I said. My voice was steady. I was almost surprised by how steady it was. "She gave them to me 6 years ago. I wore them at your son's wedding. They have been in my family since before I was born. I understand that, and I feel terrible. I'd like to know," I said, "what you plan to tell me," when I found the box empty. What exactly was the plan? She didn't answer that. I looked at Derek. He was staring at the table. "I'm going to file a police report," I said. Pat's head came up sharply. Derek looked at me. "Claire, she took property that belonged to me and sold it without my knowledge or consent. That is theft. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's factually what happened, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise to make this less uncomfortable. She's my mother, and those were my grandmother's earrings." I held his gaze. "I am not asking your permission. I am telling you what I'm going to do." I went back upstairs, took my purse, and drove to the police precinct closest to us. I filed a report. The officer I spoke with was matter-of-fact about it, took down the details, gave me a case number, explained that with the pawn shop record and the shop's requirement to log seller identification, there was documentation to follow. He told me the pawn shop would likely be required to hold the earrings if they were still in inventory, which in many cases they were for a minimum holding period. I drove to the pawn shop directly from the precinct. They still had them. The shop owner, a quiet man with a gray beard who had clearly seen every variety of human situation, walked through his door, listened to my explanation, and looked at my ID and the police report number. He went to the back. He came out with a small plastic bag. My grandmother's pearl earrings. I stood at that counter and I allowed myself exactly 30 seconds of feeling everything: the relief, the grief, the rage, the love for a woman who had been dead for 5 years, and then I put them in my purse and I drove home. Pat's car was gone when I got back. Derek was sitting in the kitchen. He looked like he hadn't moved. "She went to stay with her sister," he said. "Okay. Are you—" He stopped. Started again. "The earrings? I have them." He let out a breath. I sat down across from him. Not next to him, across from him. Because we needed to be able to see each other's faces for this conversation. "I need to tell you something," I said, "and I need you to really hear me. Not as someone who wants to fix it or smooth it over, just hear it." He nodded. "I have spent 4 years making myself smaller in my own home so that your mother would feel comfortable. I have bitten my tongue at things that were unkind and disrespectful because I wanted to preserve peace, and I love you and I knew she was important to you. I have done that willingly, and I don't regret most of it, because that's what you do when you love someone." I paused. "But this is not something I can absorb and move past without things changing. I cannot live in a house where I have to protect my belongings from your mother. I cannot keep adapting my life around someone who took something irreplaceable from me, and her plan was apparently just to hope I wouldn't notice." Derek was quiet for a long time. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your mother cannot live here anymore. I'm saying that's not negotiable, and if you need time to get there, I understand, but I need to know you're going to get there. Because if the answer is that she comes back and we all just move forward like this didn't happen, then I need to start thinking about what that means for me." He looked at me for a long time. "She made a terrible choice," he said finally. "What she did was wrong. I know that." Another pause. "She's not coming back here." I nodded. We sat together for a while after that. Not talking much. Just existing in the quiet of a house that felt different than it had that morning. Not better yet, exactly. But more honest. That evening, we didn't go to the anniversary dinner. Neither of us had the emotional bandwidth for a nice restaurant. We ordered from a Thai place we loved, ate on the couch, and watched something neither of us would later remember. But before we ate, I went upstairs, opened the wooden box on my dresser, and placed the pearl earrings back inside. Then I put the box on top of the dresser, where it belonged. Not hidden in the back of a closet, not protected from the people in my own home. Just there, in plain sight, where it had always deserved to be. In the weeks that followed, things were not simple. They never are. Pat called Derek every day for the first 2 weeks. I know because he told me, each time, what she'd said, and I want to acknowledge that he did that. He kept the channel open between us when it would have been easier, maybe, to compartmentalize. She cycled through remorseful and defensive and wounded and back again. She told him she'd been drowning financially for over a year and hadn't known how to ask for help. She told him she knew what she'd done was wrong. She told him she was going to get counseling. I don't know what is true and what is management. I'm not sure it matters for what I had to decide. What I decided was this. I was willing to have a relationship with Pat eventually, not because I owed it to her, but because I did not want to spend my life carrying the weight of permanent estrangement if she was genuinely willing to reckon with what she'd done. That process, however, would be on a timeline I controlled, not one she set by performing sufficient remorse. I also started therapy. Not because the situation broke me, but because I recognized that I had spent 4 years managing instead of communicating, and I wanted to understand why. What I've learned in those sessions could fill its own video. The short version is this. I was raised to be capable, and I mistook capability for the obligation to handle everything without complaint. Learning the difference has been, quietly, the most important work of my adult life. Derek and I are in couples counseling too. We're learning how to talk about hard things before they become crises. It is less romantic than I imagined marriage would be and more sustaining than anything I could have expected. I got a text from Pat 3 weeks after she left. It said, "I am sorry for what I did. I don't expect you to forgive me on any schedule. I just needed you to know." I read it several times. I did not respond that day. I sat with it. Let it exist without immediately deciding what it meant. 2 days later I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. I'm not ready to talk yet, but I appreciate you reaching out. I don't know what comes after that. I'm not in a hurry to find out. What I know is that I wake up in the mornings now and my house feels like mine. I know what is on my dresser and what is in my closet, and none of it requires protecting from the people inside these walls. I know that when I need to say something hard, I can say it not perfectly, not without fear, but I can say it. And I know that on my next anniversary, I'm going to wear those pearl earrings to that restaurant we never made it to. I'm going to sit across from my husband at a table we actually planned to be at. And at some point during the evening, I'm going to think about my grandmother, about the way she poured 2 cups of coffee and slid that velvet pouch across her kitchen table without making a speech about it, and I'm going to feel grateful. Not for everything that happened, but for what I learned about who I am when things get hard. She told me not to be dramatic. I'm trying. If any part of this story's euphorly to what are, I think Lily, it is not who you are. It is a situation. And situations can change. They changed for me. They can change for you too. If this reached you today, please hit like so more people can find it. If you're new here, subscribe. I share stories like this one because I believe in the quiet power of people who decide, finally, that enough is enough. I'll see you in the next one.